Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Educate, enlighten, and entertain. And on today's episode, we are talking about the evolution of presidential power from George Washington to our present president of the United States. So where do we begin? Well, we shall start at the beginning. Understanding presidential power. This is from the Social Studies of the Government and Politics, and I will provide you with the link. The concept of presidential power was left vague on purpose, but it is the cornerstone of American democracy since our country evolved. We started with George Washington, the first president of the United States, and each subsequent leader who has followed has wielded powers that have over time been expanded, constrained, and yes, redefined in response to the nation's changing needs and circumstances. Understanding how presidential power has evolved is crucial for everyone to understand and to offer us insights into the balance of power between the executive branch and government branches, as well as the implications on the nation's democratic processes, which people are saying we're losing somewhere in the process. So, the evolution of power is not just curiosity on anybody's part, but is also a mirror in which we can look through and see our or America's shifting priorities and concerns of our populace through generations. And as we track these changes, and as you read the article from Washington's tenure to the contemporary times, in particular in examining recent administrations, we can get a better understanding of the potential future trajectory of presidential authority. So what do we need to know? Well, they say in the early years of the American presidency, it said a president, something for a template for people to follow for future office holders. George Washington, for example, established a template for the role, emphasizing restraint and respect for the nascent nation structures. In other words, he was telling people you have to respect what we do and then follow them and adhere to them. Washington was acutely aware of the action's potential to set enduring precedents as seen in his decisions. So he decided to end his presidency, after 2 terms, which laid the groundwork for the 22nd Amendment. 8 years, you're allowed to serve consecutively, one after another. Following Mr. Washington, Thomas Jefferson expanded the power significantly. His acquisition of the Louisiana Territory in 1803 is one example, illustrated how executive action could alter the country's landscape, both geographically and politically. It was a French-held country. Jefferson's decision to proceed with this purchase, despite his own constitutional reservations, set a benchmark for presidential authority in foreign affairs. During Abraham Lincoln's presidency, the Civil War tested his limits of presidential power more than any previous event. Lincoln's suppression of habeas corpus and issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation was unprecedented exercises of executive power, emphasizing the flexibility of presidential authority in terms of national crisis. He was the first one for habeas corpus, ladies and gentlemen. Something for you to remember. Then we had the progressive expansion from Roosevelt to Truman. That was in the early 20th century, and more presidential powers would be expanded. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency marked a shift toward a more proactive executive role. His stewardship theory of the presidency asserted that the president was entitled to take any action necessary to benefit the public, our public, as long as it wasn't specifically forbidden by the Constitution. Let's stretch it a bit, folks. This perspective allowed Roosevelt to embark on trust-busting campaigns and extensive environmental conservation efforts. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal further entrenched the presidency as a central force in our American government. The series of economic programs implemented in response to the Great Depression, go ask your grandparents, great-grandparents, they'll tell you what happened, requires significant coordination across varying government sectors, enhancing the executive's branch leverage. Furthermore, his unprecedented four-term presidency during World War II underscore the wartime eccentricities that expand executive powers. In other words, he took advantage of the fact we were still in war, and instead of bringing in somebody new, he decided to stick around because he was already familiar with the problems, and he was the only one, according to himself and his cronies, that could do a justice job with the government. Following Roosevelt became Harry Truman's president, reinforced the theme of expanded powers during crisis. His decision to use atomic weapons in World War II and the subsequent institutionalization of national security mechanisms like the National Security Council highlighted a new level of executive influence over national and global affairs. And then we have the Cold War and Vietnam, Eisenhower to Nixon. Well, Eisenhower was a famous general from World War II. As the Cold War set the stage for modern presidential practices, Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration marked a focus on national security and foreign policy. His domino theory, which meant that if you allow communism in one country, it would have the domino effect of hitting all the other countries in a row and topping them all, so that all of Europe and Asia would come under the dominion of the communists. So that justified significant involvement in global affairs, contributing to the enlargement of military and executive resources. Then the Vietnam War under President Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon positioned the executive branch under intense security. Johnson's Gulf of Tonkin resolution authorized military escalation without a formal declaration of war by Congress. That's where our current president got it from, demonstrating an expanded interpretation of presidential military power. Nixon's presidency further complicated the demands and dynamics of presidential authority, utilizing executive privilege during the Watergate scandal and his subsequent resignation, illustrating the complex interplay of executive powers and the mechanisms checking them, which is what we're facing in today's current administration. So that gives you an idea of what we're up against. And the next time we dig into, lest we forget history, we'll ask some questions of how exactly Mr. Washington set the precedent for presidential power. Thank you very much for listening. Please go over to our website, passionalworldtalkradio.com/blog, read the summary, listen to the podcast, click on the link so you can read the rest of the story. And if you want to help us keep the lights on, please consider donating $5 passionateworldtalkradio.com/donation so you won't stub your toe on the threshold. Thank you very much for listening and have an awesome week.